across the aisle to promote a more realistic and restrained foreign policy, a foreign policy that puts an emphasis on the Constitution and getting Congress to actually take their constitutional war powers responsibilities seriously and put a vote on some of these wars that they're so eager to send so many Americans to fight overseas. Over the past year, we've had conferences on the impact of war on the economy, the environment, and religious freedom. But if you think about it, really the family being a bedrock institution of our culture and society, the impact of war on military families is really perhaps the most important topic that we've covered this past year. So I'm honored and delighted that you all came out for that. We have a slate of three excellent speakers who know personally the impact that war has upon their family and have done great work raising awareness about this cause. So we will hear them in the following order. I'll actually introduce them each individually before their respective remarks. Our first speaker today is Andrea Hibbler-McKnight of Meridian, Idaho. She's a 25-year veteran of the mortgage banking industry. Her professionalism and tenacity drove her to the top of her profession during the mortgage crisis of 2008. She is a leader in the industry and manages the day-to-day operations of her small business. As a mother of 3 teenage sons, she's involved in countless activities, programs, and teams. Her involvement in veterans organizations and advocacy programs such as the Blue Star Mothers, Gold Star Mothers, Mission 43 events, and Bring Our Troops Home has created a passion for veterans and their families. Andrea and her husband can be found trail running in the Idaho mountains, skiing, and spending time with their family. Please join me in welcoming Andrea.
Good afternoon, everybody. What a great event and great week with everybody. Dan and I are really excited to be here and be a part of this organization. As Dan has mentioned a couple of times, it just started kind of as an idea and has grown legs of its own, and I'm thrilled and honored to be a part of the group here in Washington this week. Be strong, don't complain, never worry or distract your warrior when he's on deployment, and defend your home. This is the mantra that's given to military wives and mothers of their soldiers that have been deployed. Don't complain, hide your fear, hide your worry. As of August 2018, 2,400 U.S. service members have been killed. 3,458 total soldiers have died. 20,000 U.S. service members have been wounded, and 2/3 of all Afghans suffer from mental illness issues because of the war. 147,000 people have been killed in Afghanistan since 2001, and 38,000 of them were civilians. 775,000 service members have been deployed at least once. 28,267 troops have deployed 5 or more times since the war began in 2001. It's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of families. It's a lot of husbands, wives, children, etc. It's been too long. We say it over and over again, but the effects of war on families is real. February 22nd, 2006, 4:39 a.m. I made it. We arrived in Afghanistan at approximately 0400 local time on the 21st. Our journey was interesting. Fort Hood, Texas to Newfoundland, Ireland, Turkey, I can't say the names, and then to Afghanistan. We were moving to our permanent home in a couple of days, probably deep in the Afghan mountains at a small forward operating base. I can't wait to get there and get started. The most incredible words I've ever heard. I made it. My son is in the National Guard and was activated several months ago. He has been training in Texas to be sent to replace troops coming home from Afghanistan. I have shed buckets of tears over the past couple of months, but since Sunday when he called to say goodbye and talked for about a minute just to say he was running to the plane, it's been pure hell. I told everyone at my work weeks ago not to be nice to me, don't talk to me, don't ask me how Dan is, don't even look at me this week. I I would not be able to hold it together, but not if someone asked me how he is or how I am. I pray as the days go by, I will get better. The only thought that gets me past the images I keep having in my mind about Dan is I am not the first mother, nor will I be the last mother to send to war. As you can guess, these are words spoken by Dan's mother as he was shipped off to war. As the months went by, while he was completing his mission, he was always positive. He was always excited about what the next step would be in the mission. There was a time during his deployment where he could not get the necessary supplies. You've heard the story from Dan calling the governor and asking for help. But prior to that call happening, his mother was, if you've ever met his mom, which most of you in here have not, but let me tell you, she's not a woman that I would want to go up against. She's a very strong woman. She knew the struggles he was having to get basic supplies, like boots that were not saturated in fuel from the airplanes. She took charge and was on her own mission at home. So much so that Dan was asked by his leaders to have his mom stand down. Dan's response was, "No way. You want her to stand down, you tell her yourself." They were able to get the supplies they needed thanks to some allies at home, and he continued his mission. Dan has the most positive outlook on life of any person I know. He loves what he does and tries very hard to convey that to his family. He always shares the positive and rarely shares the negative. I believe the influence he has on his men has had such a great deal to do with it. I hope you have a chance to meet him someday. I was not married to Dan at the time that he was deployed, but I've experienced the effects even 13 years later of him and the things that he has seen and done and dealt with. Mentioned in my bio that we do a lot of trail running. The hills in Boise, Idaho, where we are from, have a similarity to the hills in Afghanistan. And I remember one of the first times that him and I went running in the hills, there was a truck parked up the top of the hillside. I, of course, didn't think anything of it. And we came around the corner running, and he went down to the ground in an utter panic. I had never experienced anything like this. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if he was having a heart attack, and I was going to have to haul him off the hill, which physically I would not be able to do. But and he pulled himself together, and he just, "I'm sorry, I don't even know what just happened. I saw the truck parked up on the side of that hill. It just brought back a flashback of memories, as I've seen that so many times, but the truck was often filled with people shooting at us." It had a huge impact on me, and that is when our mission began. I have 3 teenage sons, all of which who are athletes. They are strong boys. My oldest will be graduating from high school this year, and he plans to enlist in the U.S. Marines. I have mixed feelings about that as a mother. I want him to serve his country. He wants to be a war fighter. But there's part of me that fears him not coming home, fears the effects of war on him, and I worry about his emotional and mental abilities to withstand what it is that he will have to see. Most recently, Dan and I were involved in a Veterans Appreciation event at our local high school, state champions, I might add, in football. And we put together an event to honor our veterans and our military. And a lot of these high school kids were not born when the war began. They are unfamiliar with that we're even at war or who we're fighting. The mind of a naive child is brilliant because I can't answer their questions. I don't know why we're fighting. I don't know why we're there. I don't know when it's going to end. Completely legitimate questions from a child wanting to know why we're doing this. We put the event together quickly, and every person that was asked to be involved and support the Veterans Night was a willing participant. They loved it. To see kids carry their flags, be excited about something, and not have a dry eye in the stands was an amazing event that I will never, ever, ever forget. We invited the Gold Star Mothers, and if you're not familiar with who the Gold Star Mothers are, they are an organization of mothers, that have lost a soldier. We honored them, and if you ever see a group of women walking around in white, all white, you're going to know that those are your Gold Star Mothers, and approach them peacefully and thank them for the sacrifice that their child has made for our country. With that, I'm going to show you a quick video of our Veterans Appreciation Night that we did. We are honoring Sergeant First Class Dustin Arp, who is a Green Beret from Idaho, who was wounded or was killed in Afghanistan on August 29th of this year. He left behind a wife, a 3-year-old daughter, and she was pregnant with a son. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question before you sit down?
Yeah, you bet.
If you don't mind? It's a very personal question, so
That's
you
okay.
don't have to answer it if you don't want to. In early 2017, the most prominent feature of a potential recruit indicating to an Army sergeant or officer that he was likely to be recruited was the fact that he came from a military family, either extended family or immediate family. As of 2018, that has dropped off a cliff, mainly because the Army has learned families are advising their children not to go into the Army
Right.
or the Marine Corps with them. Why did you make the opposite decision?
You know, I think this day and age, having 3 teenage boys, I see the floundering much more than when I was their age. They don't know what to do with their life. They're not sure what direction they're supposed to go in next. And particularly with my oldest son, I think that going in the military, making him feel good about what he's doing and feeling purpose is why I would encourage him to go into the military. I think he will feel a sense of honor and pride in himself and have a purpose. And I think that is one of the most important things of a young man or woman of that age, is having a purpose and knowing what direction to go in next in their life.
Can I tell you that's an excellent answer?
Oh, good.
But it is very discouraging to those of us who are veterans that this has happened.
Right.
That now military families are actually disinclined to recommend to their children that they go in.
I hear it a lot, and as much as I want the endless war to end, I also believe and support our military 100%, and if my children made that choice to serve their country, I would support them and I would not discourage them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for the work that you do, and you and your husband, and for that, showing the video. Our next speaker is Rebecca Adams. Rebecca has a passion to educate and help military spouses and families as they transition out of the military. She has a background in education and behavioral therapy, and has experience teaching abroad and working with children and families in the social field. She promotes community and draws from her experiences as a military wife to encourage others. She's an active member of Hearts of Valor, a military spouse support group, and currently resides in Idaho with her husband, son, and their 2 dogs. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rebecca Adams.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Committee of Responsible Foreign Policy for inviting me to speak here today. This is a topic that is very close to my heart. We are hardwired to gain knowledge through stories, and so today I will be sharing stories from mothers, children, and spouses who have directly felt the impact of war. These are people that I know personally, and I will also be sharing portions of my own story as well. Each story is shared with permission, and as you listen, please keep in mind that community and mental health care for our military families are 2 areas that are the most needed. It was one thing to watch my husband leave for war, but now that I'm a mother, I can't imagine sending my son or daughter off to fight multiple times. This is one Blue Star mother's story of how her son's war experience impacted his relationship with their family. When I think of our son, I always envision our sweet, blue-eyed little boy who had endless amounts of energy. He was the 4th of our 6 children and always the life of the party. He was very loving and affectionate. He loved spending time with family and friends. He just loved life. Fast forward to post-2 deployments to Afghanistan. Our son came home and at initial glance, he seemed the same. But as we started having conversations in the living room, we saw outbursts of rage and anger. He spent a large part of his time withdrawn from the family. He was not near as affectionate and had picked up smoking and drinking heavily. He didn't laugh very much, and it just seemed that he was tormented. It seemed as though someone had snatched our son's very soul out of his body, and he was no longer there. And she says, although our son still struggles, I thank God that he has come a long way. This next story is from another mother, and some of you here today may know her. My son, Corporal Matthew T. Winkler, USMC, returned home after serving 6 years and 2 combat tours overseas. Or should I say the shell of the person who was my son. The outward signs of PTSD became visible to both myself and my daughter immediately. The smoking, the alcohol, the hypervigilance, and the mood swings, to name a few. The days of watching Matt attempt to go through alcohol withdrawal alone was enough to tear a mother's heart out. He struggled to be able to find and keep a steady job that had a purpose. Let's go back to August 2016, the start of what Matt would later write as the perfect storm. His struggles were becoming more visible at home, and my daughter was nervous for me to even live with him. I would come home from work every day and be so scared I would find him dead in my home. Then I thought we'd gotten through the storm when Matt took it upon himself to get help at the VA. First calling the hotline and saying he was suicidal, and then driving to the nearest VA hospital. He agreed with the encouragement of family to admit himself for treatment. He received help in the 72 hours he was there and left with an appointment card in hand. He returned for that appointment, but the doctor was a no-show. He called the hotline again and again, and they kept saying, we'll work on it. It was then that I also realized that as a mother and as Matt's caregiver, I had no rights and no one cared about my opinion of my son. I kept saying he was going to die if someone doesn't help him. With no private health insurance, the VA was the only source of the physical and mental health care that he so desperately needed. By September, Matt was in the eye of the perfect storm. He had totaled his car, broke up with a girlfriend, attempted suicide, and had $60 to his name. He was still delivering pizza and had no job with a purpose in his eyes. Then on September 16th, 2016, just 10 days before Matt's birthday, my life changed forever. On September 15th, Matt kissed me goodbye, said that he loved me. He went to a public park near a lake and sat in my car. He wrote a 4-page letter and left all of his military and medical records. The demons and having no self-worth had finally become too much for him, as well as anger over a system who kept putting a Band-Aid on his conditions. It was that September 16th that a detective informed me they had found my son deceased by a gunshot wound. This would be the day that I also learned how alone and on an isolated island I was going to be as the mother of a military member who decided they could not live with the demons of war, that invisible wound. I called the VA to inform them my son would not be at his next appointment, and they said thank you and hung up. As the days after my son's death has become years, I'm still sitting on that island of isolation. I still do not belong to any formal military support group because they don't recognize suicide as a combat service-related death. I'm still paying for a hero funeral for my son by working 3 jobs. She ended her story with 2 quotes from her daughter. The number 22 is only a number until it happens to you. And if you want to know if someone has PTSD, ask the ones who love them. On a different note, military children are some of the strongest and most resilient children that you'll ever meet. But they have to learn the harsh realities of life and possible death at a very young age. This young man, now nearly 16, tells his story of his father's deployment with the National Guard. He says, "My life has been quite hectic, but through the grace of God and my mother, I've found ways to cope. The biggest struggle in my life is my father's military lifestyle, which has made me grow up differently. One event that had a tremendous impact on me was when my dad deployed to Afghanistan in 2012. I was only 8 at the time, and life was especially hard with my father being away and knowing the risk of him possibly not coming home. Every day I would wake up and not know if that hug, which felt forever ago, would be the last. The event that had the biggest impact on me during the deployment is when an Apache malfunctioned in the area where my dad was. 2 American soldiers were killed in the accident, and news spread to our family, but the soldiers were not allowed to be in contact with their families. My mind was flustered with all sorts of emotions, and I didn't know how to respond other than just crying. I felt like I was alone and lost, and I just started praying. I prayed more than I'd ever prayed before. My mom supported me, but it was still hard to ask for help. A few days later, my dad called my mom on a satellite phone and told us he was safe, and this gave me hope and relief of stress. Not only then, but I'm able to look back now and use this experience in other areas of my life. And this next story is actually from his mother, which she's actually my cousin. At the age of 19, I was a mother, military wife, and homeowner living alone with our baby. Not something you would typically think of from a newly married couple. Our little boy started smacking his head off the wall all the time. His doctor said it was due to the separation of his dad being gone. It broke our hearts. Fast forward 7 years and added another child, and my husband was being deployed again. This time our oldest was taking it very hard. He had to go to therapy and started pulling his hair out. His ADHD got so much worse too. Our youngest ate for comfort and has had an issue ever since. Currently, at the age of 11, has a severe weight issue. Therapy and medical tests show nothing physically wrong to cause the weight gain, and he has severe health issues. Before my husband's latest deployment, we had to rehome our 2 huskies that became part of the family because of my health issues. I could not take care of them alone. So not only was Dad taken away, but the kids lost some of their best friends as well. During the last deployment, we had a helicopter go down, taking the lives of 2 great men. All communication was down. We had no idea who was on board, how many were hurt or dead, or if any on the ground were injured as well. It was by far the worst day of my entire life. When I heard the phone ring, and it was my husband's voice on the other end, telling me he was alive and to tell his parents he was alive, I was so relieved. I fell to the ground. I was so happy, but so weak. Every year, around the time of the anniversary of the crash, life gets a little tense in our home. We will never forget those men. When others are having barbecues to remember the fallen, we are at home remembering those great men. I wouldn't change a thing. It's important to honor the brave who lost their lives. Military life is not for the weak. It makes you stronger. You learn to cry when no one's looking and smile through the bad times, because the bad times could always be worse. A military wife and mother whose husband did over 20 years writes, "Military children have a lot to fear about something happening to their parent. I was very careful about not having the news on and not talking in a lot of detail about what was going on, but the kids still know. After we dropped my husband off for his 13-month-long deployment, we were driving home and my oldest son says, 'If Daddy dies, will the Marine Corps tell us?' It broke my heart that he had that on his heart and mind. It was very helpful for my daughter to have the deployment group at school and neighbors who had deployed parents. It normalized it. When the kids were small, back-to-back deployments didn't affect them as much. It was more of just a significant portion of their lives. My husband was only present for about half of our youngest life before the age of 4, if you count the trainings. I was supported and therefore their needs were met and they were fine. After being in a non-deploying unit for 3 years, the kids grew used to him being home all the time. And then we moved to North Carolina, where they moved across the country. They lost most of their friends and support to Daddy being gone, and everything was new and difficult. My daughter cried a lot and my son was really angry. I was able to receive respite care, which helped immensely because I was able to get a little bit of a break for me. When my husband returned home, it was difficult because he couldn't just jump back in. He had to build up those relationships with the kids. Especially our oldest, who was angry he was gone. I think my kids are stronger in the long run and they all have a great relationship with their dad. When my husband retired, I think that leaving the close-knit group of kids and spouses made the transition even harder than it was for my husband adjusting to the civilian world. We had so much support from the school and fellow military families, and it's just not like that in the civilian world. Before I tell my personal story, I want to say these are only a few aspects of the impact war has on military families. I don't have time to touch on wounded soldiers, infertility issues, and so many more. But I just want to say thank you for your kind listening, and here's my story. When I think of my life as a military wife and our journey beyond, the first thing I feel is pride. I was swept away in the sense of duty to country, honor, and just the adventure of it all. We were best friends and in love. Of course we would make it. Of course it would be hard, but love is inseparable. He deployed 2 months after we got married. My first realization that he might not return the same was after taking a class on base on the signs of post-traumatic stress. Okay, so now I knew what to expect. That's right, let's replace. I didn't even think about how it would begin to affect me too. When he returned from his first deployment, I rationalized he was just going through some natural return culture shock. And things would be better in a few months. He had dropped 40 pounds, had trench foot, was urinating blood, and was vomiting every day. Our relationship with his family became strained when they couldn't wrap their heads around the changes, and our own relationship suffered as well. After his second deployment, I began to have what I came to understand were intense panic attacks and anxiety. 3 years of suppressed worry and anxiety had caught up with me. I didn't know much at all about anxiety, but I started asking around, and it turns out most of my military friends had the same exact struggles. After 2 back-to-back deployments, he was in a living hell in his mind at all times and trying desperately to hide it. We moved across the country, and I had a lot of hope that things would get better. A new adventure, a non-deployable unit, and now we were going to have a baby. A little into my pregnancy, my husband reached an all-time low. He sought treatment and things went from bad to worse. Flashbacks at work, blackouts, and self-destructive coping skills. I was working full-time, trying to pursue a master's degree, pregnant, and now he was on a med board. With the uncertainty of everything around me, I started having health issues. Our son was born at only 3.5 pounds, and I thank God he was born very healthy. My husband was retired from the military. We moved and he started school right away. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. When we moved, I felt like my entire support system was suddenly gone. The military is very communal. My neighbors were my best friends and those in the unit. I could walk out my front door and just go over and talk to a friend. They were always there for you. We both felt alone. I had trouble relating to friends and family who were unfamiliar with the military. He was grieving the loss of his beloved career, and friend after friend was committing suicide. He became so severely depressed. I remember staying awake with him until the wee hours of the morning for a long period of time because I lived in fear that if I fell asleep, I would wake up to find him dead. He called the suicide hotline several times, but I remember one night I called for him. I didn't know what to do. And I just remember convincing him to take the phone and just talk to them. I felt hopeless. I was being told, this is your new normal. Things may never get better. And I had to accept that. After trying to juggle being a mom, taking care of my husband, and working full-time, I became emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausted. And I couldn't handle life. I began to see that my own health needed to take priority, but I just didn't have the time. It's so hard to watch the ones you love the most struggle to find a purpose in life. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope. Jeremiah 29:11, that's a promise, and that is what I clung to. Yes, things have improved so much since then. Thank you to some great friends, and I just want to thank, especially right now, Josh Hayes. You have no idea how much your friendship has meant to us. And some amazing organizations that we've been able to be a part of. But I will tell you, there's a time in the deployments when they come back that you expect to feel that relief, that sense of everything's okay. But I feel like in some ways that last deployment, that never came. It felt like it never ended. In November of 2012, my husband came home from war. His war isn't over in his mind or in that country. How I wish that war could end.
Thank you, Rebecca, for your willingness to share your story with us today. Our next speaker is Brigadier General Don Bolda. He served 36 years in the U.S. Army. He led one of the first groups in Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks, riding horseback to take control of southern Afghanistan from the Taliban. He served as Commander, Combined Joint Special Operations Component Command in Afghanistan, Deputy Director for U.S. Africa Command, as a Special Operations Command Africa. He earned 2 awards for valor, 5 Bronze Star medals, 2 Purple Hearts, and the Defense Service Medal, Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit, and Army Commendation Medal with Valor device. Please join me in welcoming Brigadier General Don Bolda.
Thanks, man. Well, what a very powerful testimonies we just heard, right? And they're not only powerful, they're not only real, but there's too many of them. There's way, way too many. And I'm sorry for how you have suffered. It's not the way it should be. There's a biblical scripture called Isaiah 6:8 that says, I heard the voice of the Lord say, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And then I heard a voice say, "Here I am, send me." And that, to me, embodies the men and women who volunteer to serve our country and go off and serve in places that our country sends them to, do the things our country asks them to do. And then when they return, we are not paying them and their families the attention that they deserve, giving them the help that they're going to need. Because I, for one, am glad that war changes us, that war makes us more vulnerable, that war forces us to appreciate life, that war gives us a moral injury that we wish others will never have to suffer. But if we are not willing to invest the time and effort into helping those that we send off to war and helping their families, then we are not fully understanding our responsibilities. And those responsibilities are leadership responsibilities, both in the military and in the civilian world. Civilians are the ones that make the decisions. The military carries it out. That's a dual responsibility. Neither one of them are totally at fault. But the combination of the two must retain the responsibility and the blame when we don't do it right. I wish my wife was here. It's unfortunate that she cannot be here because she has been a family advocate for many, many years. I talked last night about how my wife got me to go for help while I was on active duty in 2013. I talked about how I did that. In that 2 years I did it under the radar because I was afraid what was going to happen to my career. And then in my last assignment as division level commander in special operations, I came forward and I said, hey, I have post-traumatic stress, I have TBI. We have to do this differently. We must lead from the top. We must take this mental and moral injury and we must turn it into a strength and become more resilient, and we must help our families. Our families are taking the brunt of this now. It is our war over there. It is their war when we come home. And if we do not invest in that, then it has devastating results. 33 plus years in the military, 18 moves, 10 combat rotations in Afghanistan. I spent most of my 4 years in AFRICOM, on the African continent, away from home. I barely saw my 3 children as they grew up. I felt more comfortable in combat than I did at home. My wife bore the brunt of this, our entire relationship, right? And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have gone for help. And if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have developed a program to help our families inside our organization. Let me tell you something. That program identified 52 men and women in our command with post-traumatic stress, 471 with traumatic brain injury, over 1,000 people with pain management issues that they were self-medicating for, sleep disorders off the charts, and neurotoxicity from taking malaria and other things that they shoved down our throats for good reasons. I never got malaria, right? But I had all kinds of other side effects, and so did many others. And we just have to own up to this, and we have to treat it, and we have to be responsible. The answers that she got and others got in their testimony was absolutely unacceptable. This is not a new normal. That is a cop-out. It's like when people say, well, you know, we need to do no harm. Yeah, no kidding. No, I woke up this morning, I was shaving, and I was wondering how much harm I can do out there when I go to work. Nobody does that, right? Nobody does that. It's a cop-out. I don't have a plan. It's not affecting me, so therefore I'm not going to get involved. Countless families are destroyed because of this. Families are the backbone of our country, right? And it's an easy problem to ignore when less than 1% of the families in our country are affected by it, because less than 1% serve, right? And there's only 23 or so million veterans and families, so it's an easy problem to ignore, right? Because it's not a big problem. We don't have any buy-in in our society. Now, I'm going to say something pretty provocative here, right? This volunteer military we have is broken. It doesn't work anymore. It served its purpose between Vietnam and now. Actually, way before now. Right? We need the American people to invest in their military. And the only way to do that is by getting people at all levels of our society to serve. And if they put that kind of skin in the game, I guarantee you that our VA will be squared away. I guarantee you that when people come back and they're the sons of and daughters of CEOs and highfalutin politicians and all this other crap that's out there, right? Oh, it'll change, and it'll change on a dime. Because they will not want and will not tolerate their families being treated the way families are being treated now. We have a huge problem out there. And it's growing and growing and growing. And there's nothing being done about it, or very little being done about it, because it's stuck in a bureaucratic system that can't respond properly and will not respond properly until it is fixed. Our president is trying to do that, but he butts up against every single day a bureaucracy that defeats everything that he's trying to do. And the mentality that you get the answer, oh, that's your new normal, that's what you're supposed to expect, get used to it. Wow. We got to track those people down, and we got to fire them, right? They have no business having the privilege and honor of being associated with veterans in our families. Military service includes the entire family. And if we're going to truly take care of our families and our veterans, we have to consider them one, right? Not separate and distinct, right? They're one. You know what I mean? And I think that is the problem that we have. We got the service member, we got the veteran, and then we have the family member. And they refuse to connect them in a meaningful way. One of your testimonies experienced that, right? It's just it's wrong on all levels. And we have to start doing something about it. Nobody escapes the effects of war. Nobody. Whether you win or you lose. It is what it is. And I am glad that we don't lose our humanity and our compassion. I know personally what that does. There are many in here that know personally what that does. And the idea that people need to keep that pushed down inside them somewhere where it manifests itself in destructive behavior is wrong. I'm telling you right now that for the first time we're hearing incredible stories from Korean War veterans and from World War II veterans and from Vietnam veterans, because it's becoming acceptable to talk about what they were told they couldn't talk about before. And that's huge. And we're learning huge lessons from it. And we have to carry those lessons forward. We have studies going back to antiquity about this. The Spartans. There's evidence that the Spartans suffered from post-traumatic stress. Traumatic brain injury was part of their business. They clunked each other on the head with heavy objects, right? The interesting thing between post-traumatic stress and TBI is their symptoms mimic. So if you're not diagnosed properly, you might be treated for the wrong things. And that's happening over and over again. My wife told me that the hardest time of our military career was our first year of transition out of the U.S. military. Now, I've only been out for 2 years. 33 years, 18 moves, right? All that stuff. Nothing compared to our first year out. We were still trying to get our rating, still trying to get my VA insurance, or get covered by the VA. We had 2 kids in college. We had to pay for medical stuff. First year we were out, we couldn't afford medical care for me or my wife. You think because I'm a retired brigadier general that I get a big paycheck? Well, I don't. I have to work full time in addition to retirement just like everybody else. And if I have to do that, I recognized very quickly that what's the sergeant doing? Right? It's even worse. And then we wonder why we have homeless rates and unemployment rates and suicide rates the way they are. And I'll tell you that in my command I had 3 suicides. I had one sergeant who the day before he was ready to redeploy, he went out to the range, took a gun, sat at the range, and killed himself. And when we did the investigation, what came out of that investigation was that it was too painful for him to go home. That was the last straw. He had deployed so many times to Afghanistan and Iraq. He was now doing the same kind of deployments in Africa, in the same kind of environment. He was suffering with post-traumatic stress, and he couldn't get any help, and he didn't want to go home and burden his family once again. So he took his life. We have to be better than that. Our families are suffering. And there are suicides inside our military families among the wives and the children that we haven't even begun to study yet and understand the effects of that. But it's coming. If we can't take care of less than 1% of the population and 23 million Americans that serve their country in this country, then we got a big problem. We got a huge problem, right? We got to do it better. And if we're going to send them to war, and we're going to send them to war over and over again, because we lack the proper policies and strategies, we got even a bigger problem. Because we're burning both ends of that candle, right, into a powder keg. We owe them more. And it's time to get serious about that. And I realize I'm speaking to the choir on this in here, but it's a hugely important message. And you don't hear very many general officers talk about it. I am a former general officer, and I hold some of that blame for not doing more earlier. And for that, I'm sorry. The only thing I can do is apologize, admit my mistake, and move forward. And it's not going to happen on my watch. And we got to get more people at higher levels serious about this. Because we do not need any more testimonials like we heard. We shouldn't have to. And that testimony comes from this generation, our Vietnam generation, our Korean War generation, our World War II generation, rapidly dwindling, are affected negatively as well. We must encourage people to understand and talk about it. This is the effect of it. I'll just show you what happened, right? Could you come here? Could you sit right here? Sit right here for me, please, sir. This is how they feel. You have a broken ankle. You're going to go to the doctor. You're going to go back to work. You broke your ankle playing basketball with your buddies at work. You're going to come to work. People are going to say, "Oh man, how's your ankle?" It's pretty good. Well, hey, if you need anything for lunch or need me to carry your bag or anything, just let me know. We're here for you. Right? Broken ankle. Physical injury. Man down.
I'm sorry.
Mental injury. Post-traumatic stress. What do we do to this man? Victor. What do we do to this man? We separate him from the crowd. We take him away from everything that's important. We stigmatize that person. And we say, he's got post-traumatic stress. And everybody looks at him. And he's on an island. And then he gets insufficient care. And everywhere he turns is a roadblock, right? And the next thing you know, he's isolating himself. Because we did it to him, so he's going to do it to himself. The next thing we know, not only is he going to isolate himself, but now he's going to develop some very destructive personal bad habits. And then he's not going to go to work. And then he's going to lose his job. And now he's not going to be able to provide for his family. Now his family is going to be under stress. And now he's going to argue with his wife. And because of everything that he's suffering from, he can't be intimate with his wife anymore. So he's lost his job. He's lost his self-worth. He can't be intimate with his wife. He feels estranged from his family. And that's when they commit suicide. We need to start viewing the mental and moral injury and accepting it in the same way we do a physical injury. Because that post-traumatic stress and that traumatic brain injury, or whatever it is they're suffering from, can be effectively treated just like a broken ankle, and they're just as high functioning as anyone else. You feel strange sitting here? Yeah, I would. You know what I mean? And when I talk to people about this and I do this, this is a pretty visual thing to see, right? And people get that mental image. And then they realize, wow, I do that. I became known as the general with PTS, right? But the general with PTS would go to general officer conferences and sit around the table. Now, I was the general with PTS that was getting therapy, right? I was very resilient. And I could tell all around that table, all the other generals that had PTS and weren't getting taken care of. It's visible. You said it. You want to know if someone has PTS? Ask a family member. Ask someone who's doing the observing. Right? It's why the NFL has the policy, the huddle policy, where if somebody is acting strange in the huddle because they got hit wrong, it's incumbent upon one of his buddies to pull him aside and get him checked. And that's the kind of policy that we need. I'm not saying the NFL has done everything right, but that's a pretty good policy. Buddy team. All right? Thank you for letting me use you as an example. All right? All right. You're very welcome. So, nothing more important than our families in this country. Nothing more important than taking care of our warriors that we send off to war. It's a moral obligation. And if we were doing it, we wouldn't have these testimonies. You're very brave for talking. Your message is huge. You should be all over the country You should be all over the television. You should be all over Capitol Hill. And you should be educating people that don't understand and get them to understand. So, I admire you very, very much. It takes a lot of strength to do what you did. It's a vulnerability that not many people have the moral courage to do. So thank you very much. God bless you, and God bless you all. Thanks.
We do have a few minutes for questions.
I'd love to take any questions. Yes, sir.
In your discussion and the previous ones, one of the biggest issues or problems seems the constant rotation of soldiers to new bases all the time. I understand 100 years ago there was a purpose to unify the country, but today with helicopters and whatever, iPhone, is that still the policy of the Army? Is there any pressure to change it? And is it, do you have any thoughts on the rotation? You were saying so often the families then are torn up, but there's no support in the Army.
Right. So it's a function of the volunteer army, and that's why I think the volunteer army is broken. Right. Volunteer army is a up and out. You continue to rise in rank. If you don't continue to rise in rank, you're out. Right. Okay. The volunteer service is you come in and you rotate around to all your different assignments based off of a PCS thing. Right. And they move people in, they move people out. I think it's very dysfunctional. We could save a lot of money, we could save a lot of time if we change that business model and we kept people in, right? And we stabilized their duty station so that Fort Carson, Colorado is where they went at the beginning, is where they go at the end. They're done, right? And I think we need to really look at the fact that we are a different society technology-wise, and our military doesn't have to be the same military that it was between 1975 and 2002, right? It can be completely different. And I think that the idea of national service, I think the idea of, if you want to be a truck driver in the military all your life, then why can't you be the best damn truck driver in the military all your life, right? Why is there this reason to move people through the ranks, right? Do we need that kind of military? And these are the kinds of reforms that need to be discussed that aren't being discussed right now. Because we don't have people there that want to discuss reform. The Department of Defense is not going to reform itself. All good reform that's happened to our military has come from outside. We need to get people in there that are going to force that reform and have a conversation about it. That understand that the way we're doing business now doesn't need to be the way we're doing business. And that stability in families is probably one of the things we want to think about, right? And then we would spend less money on family stability programs if we built in stability into our military organizations, right? Organizational structure. You see what I mean? You wouldn't need an additional program. Because as soon as you build an additional program, that's the first thing that goes, right? Family programs. Because it's additional. See what I mean? And so I think there's a lot of room for reform in the military. I think there's a lot of room for stabilizing our folks at, different bases, right? And perhaps the only places that you need to rotate people over to is overseas, right? And trust me, there's never a shortage of people that want to go to Germany. Right? Or places like that. Now, other places may be a different story. I know my first assignment as a lieutenant was in Korea, and it was an unaccompanied assignment for a year. So, it is what it is. I mean, those things are going to happen, but you go for a year and you come right back to where you came from, right? And it's just one of those interruptions that happens as a result of military service. But as she said, the resiliency in the military family is very high, as long as we pay attention to it. What we've done is, we've done things that has decreased the resiliency in the military family by not building the resiliency and paying attention to resiliency in our service members after they come back from war, right? And this is an old problem, not a new problem. And we need to we need to address this problem in a more meaningful way, and we're just not doing it. Right? We're not doing it. I mean, you heard the people talk this morning. You heard how they suffered. Nobody is weak. You're strong if you ask for help. Nobody is weak. That's the problem, because they think we have this idea that people are weak, and that's not the case at all. People are strong. I hope I, in some way, answered your question.
Well, are they reforming?
Hmm?
They're not reforming.
No, there's
And it's very expensive.
hmm?
It's also very expensive, rotating, moving
It is.
to different bases.
Yes, it is, yeah. There's a lot of ways to save money, right? And that's what we need to be in the business of now, is getting the most out of our dollar, right? Department of Defense has a darn good budget, and rightly so. We want to invest in our national security, but we also want to spend that money smartly. And as you just pointed out, probably better ways to spend it smartly, and that's one of them. You know what I mean? So, anyway. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Sir, you're speaking about spending money smartly. So let's say we're successful in bringing the troops home and stopping all these endless wars. Now we're saving all this money. So I have a crazy suggestion. Since every time we have an armed conflict or a war, it seems like there's endless money for endless wars.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we, after everybody's home, knock off the foreign aid and spending all this money, aside from wars,
Mm-hmm.
and the money from the war, stop all that, and let's declare war on ourselves, a peaceful, non-violent war, so that money can flow just like it does. Think about it. If we got money for wars overseas, and we got money for foreign aid, and we got money for foreigners here. I'm a foreign born. I was basically a Cuban refugee in Vietnam as a volunteer from the 82nd Airborne Division. But I earned my citizenship. I didn't get it till after I spent 20 months in Vietnam. I have a problem with spending money on foreigners. A lot of them, I've had relatives. They come here from Cuba at an older age. They never work a day in the United States. They come to die here at your expenses, at the taxpayers' expenses, at the veterans' expenses. Right away, they're getting all these benefits. They never fought a war, even wore a military uniform for the United States. We're just stupid. Really, we are. We're throwing our money all over the world, and there's no money for veterans. There's no money for the homeless. Social Security is going bankrupt. Medicare. Are we stupid? So let's declare a peaceful, non-violent war against ourselves, and let the money flow like it flows out to wars, and like it flows out to foreigners. Foreign aid. We've even given foreign aid to Red China for pollution. I believe I read about $3 million or something like that. We're crazy. We really are, with our money. And as a result of that, there's a lot of programs for veterans that could be started, but there's no money. We don't have the money. No, because you're giving it to foreigners.
Right. You're right. America has a spending problem, and it's a national security concern. And it needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be dealt with now. And the redundancy that we have in our government, the size of our government, it all needs to be reduced. When you look at veterans, there are 4 departments in our country that are responsible for veterans. DOD, Veteran Affairs, Labor, and HUD. They all get money for veterans. You got to go through 4 different departments for 4 different reasons that really have everything to do with helping a veteran. Why? And I'm not even sure when they get that money that it's appropriated properly, because once they get the money, they're going to prioritize it for their own department, and their own department's needs and priorities. Excuse me, so I'm not sure it's even getting applied to our veterans. I got to get an inside look on that, right? But we have to reduce the redundancy of our departments, shrink them, combine them, and we have to stop spending money like a drunken sailor, right?
Easy now.
I'm sorry.
Squid, like a drunken
Sorry, sir.
squid, like a drunken
Sorry.
squid.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you know what I mean?
Anyways, he resembles our part.
Yeah, so it's your money, and it's irresponsible, and we need to get control of our spending problem and control of our deficit, because it is a national security concern. And we have to free up, not even free up, that would allow us to be able to put money in, you know, more meaningful programs, which is what you're talking about, and that's hugely important. I like how you couched that. It was clever. I didn't mean to laugh, but
No,
I saw it coming.
I have that
I got
sarcasm
you.
in it.
Clear war on
It's built
ourselves
in.
so that we can spend money on ourselves.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
So assuming that we are able to bring our troops back home and we do accomplish our mission that we are here for, we've talked about and we've heard from Rebecca, who I had been spoken up to her when I came back to my deployment, which was 5 years ago. I did back-to-back combat deployments in Afghanistan. We've heard everybody speak and give an emotional, and you've been through this. You know how you come back emotionally unattached. I had someone on Veterans Day on Monday, actually a few days ago, told me her brother came back, what was the word, defected. He came back defected, and I was like, that's not the proper word for that. He has issues that he needs to deal with. Assuming that we are able to get all our troops back home, I told you earlier when I spoke to you privately, I told you one of my first experiences at the VA, they said, well, you knew what you signed up for. And they sent me away. And I had to go back and fight for, you know, for my percentage, and because it's something that's there for us. That is help. That is financial help. Because I was a corporal when I got out in E4. Because when I was in Afghanistan, they, well, admin messed everything up, but that's okay. So I came back as an E4. You know, didn't get a retirement, didn't get anything, but I had my own issues that I didn't speak out to, because in the Marine Corps they teach you don't ask for help. So then I go to the VA. There's no medical records on me. I never was hurt. I never had issues, but I had my issues. So how do we help transition our troops so we are able to get them back home? What plans do we have in place, or what are the, you know, the options that we have for them and their family members?
Yeah, see, here is a classic example of what one of the things that's wrong in this establishment, right, is that the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, they don't talk to each other. Their communication systems aren't linked, right? You should have had a full physical, and everything that you were medically should have been noted. You should have been given a rating. Service connected, not service connected. You were in the service, so everything probably would have been service connected. War or training, combat or training. They have all these identifiers that your service in your unit is supposed to make sure you have. It doesn't get done. And it didn't get done for you, did it? And you should have got that on a disc. And then you take that disc over to the VSO, the Veteran Support Officer or Service Officer, and you hand them that disc. And they take that disc and they open it up. And they look at it. And they go, okay, service connected, blah, blah, blah. They set you up for the veterans doctors to look at you. Because the DOD doctors aren't good enough, right? Somehow the DOD doctors are different from the Veteran Affairs, which are going to be contracted doctors anyways. So you're going to have to go out on the civilian while they'll contract them, right? And do it, right? You didn't get that disc, so you didn't have the ability to go over to your VA rep, sit down, and this should have been done right at your unit station, right? Before you got out. And then the day you got out, then the VA, because they can't do it before you get out, which makes absolute no sense to me, another bureaucratic restriction that's dumb, right? So the day you get out, that authorizes the VA to look at your records and give you a rating, right? But they won't give you that rating until their doctors have looked at you to validate what the DOD doctors found, right? So anyways, a year later, you'll get your rating, right? In the meantime, you know, these other things that you're wishing could happen, you're providing additional information because they're going to have questions, and so on and so on and so on, right? It's a broken system. That should not happen. That's a leadership failure on your leadership's part in the United States Marine Corps. I found out this was going on in my unit shortly after I took command. A colonel came back from Africa. He was one of my commanders in Tunisia. And I thanked him. I was only in command for 2 weeks. He came home. I go, so what's next? And he goes, well, I got to go back to MacDill Air Force Base. I retire in 2 weeks. And I go, retire in 2 weeks? How are you going to get everything taken care of? How are you going to take your family? Well, he goes, I'm going to be in a bit of a problem, right? And I got all my guys together and I go, do a scrub. Anybody who is within 6 months of getting out in this unit stops working. Whoever the second person in the chain of command is assumes their responsibilities until their replacement comes in. And for 6 months, they're going to do nothing but get ready to either to retire or to end their term of service. Right? You wouldn't believe how many people I had to go down to their office and say, hey, Sergeant Jones, you're getting out in 6 months. I need you to take care of your family and do the program this unit set up for you. Well, sir, I can't. I got to work. I got to do this. There's no one to backfill me. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Sergeant Thomas right here is going to take your position. And you're going to go take care of your family, and you're going to make sure that you're squared away. Am I clear enough for you? Right? I did that personally. I didn't pass it down. That's how important it is. And if that's what it takes to ensure that you're squared away on your way out, then that's the kind of investment that I have to make. Right? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because when I get my roster and I ask, hey, how's it going, how's it going, how's it going, I don't get the answer I want. You know what I mean? You know? That's why you become a general officer. You become a general officer because you've been given an opportunity to work for others in a way that you couldn't work for them before. Because general officers can do a lot of stuff, right? And you should be spending your stuff in time on your people, right? I got a deputy commander to handle all that other stuff, right? Let him do his job. I don't worry about doing his job. I just do my job. My job is to take care of people. That's how I saw it. Take care of people. For years and years and years, I thought mission, people, family. Mission, people, family. Mission first, mission first, mission first. Then I realized, no, we got it backwards. It's people, family, mission. If you take care of the people, you take care of their families, the mission takes care of itself. And I firmly believe that. And I've seen it work. Let me tell you something. When you invest in a family member, when you invest in a service member, you got them for life. They'll do anything for you and the unit. Right? If you're just using them to get a mission done, right? Use.
That's how they feel.
That's how they feel. And they won't do everything for you. They'll do what they need to do because they have to. But they'll never take that extra step because they know you're not gonna. See what I'm saying? Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
I understand.
I'm told I gotta go.
Sorry.
I probably went over time.
No, perfect.
No.
We're
Finish before
sending
1:30.
you, we're sending you to Africa again.
Let's give our speakers one more round of applause.